How many broken souls does it take to turn a ghost town into a home again? There are places on the map where time stands still. A single road, a sun-bleached sign, and silence so deep it presses against your heart. But what if, one ordinary evening, a broken man and his loyal dog set foot in such a ghost town, hoping only to disappear, only to find that loneliness is never truly empty. As shadows move, secrets unravel, and silent hands reach out in the dark. A wounded town and the people left behind will be asked, is it ever too late to come home? The old Chevy pickup moved down the gravel road with the quiet determination of something that had carried burdens heavier than lumber or stone. Its faded blue paint was the same color as the sky before a storm, and the dust that gathered on the hood as it rattled through the Montana dusk seemed only to settle deeper into the creases. As if the truck and the land belonged to each other, Sam Rivers sat behind the wheel, hands loose but steady. 50 years old, he had the weathered look of a man who had spent more time outside than in. He wore a plain flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, forearms marked by sun and years of work. His beard was salt and pepper, more salt than pepper now. He hadn't spoken much on the drive. And even now, as the silhouette of the ghost town rose out of the prairie grass ahead, he kept his silence. There was something about open spaces that demanded quiet. Atlas, his German shepherd, sat on the bench seat beside him. The dog's coat was a rich tapestry of black and gold, the kind that caught what little sun remained and turned it into a faint glow. Atlas was 6 years old, solid and calm, but there was a light in his eyes, intelligent, searching, always aware. He rode well, still as a photograph until the pickup slowed. Then he leaned forward, nose close to the glass, ears twitching at the unknown. The road into town narrowed. On either side, sage and dry grass crept up to the edge of broken pavement, swallowing the years with indifference. A wooden sign, long since faded to a pale gray, still hung at a tilt from 2 rusty bolts. Whisper Ridge, Pop, 27. The numbers were crossed out, and beneath, someone had scrawled, none left but ghosts. The wind shifted, making the sign creak on its hinges, a hollow sound in the wide emptiness. Sam stopped the truck in front of what had once been the general store, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, hands resting in his lap. The silence that followed was total. No cars, no voices, not even the cry of a hawk overhead, just the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled, and the faint breath of Atlas beside him. It was the kind of silence you felt in your bones. He opened the door, boots finding the ground with a thud. The dust swirled up, dry and fine, and Sam paused, breathing it in. Atlas jumped down, landing quietly, tail flicking once. The dog stood beside him, not pulling ahead, just watching, nose high, drawing in every new scent. Sam let his hand rest on Atlas's back for a moment, grounding himself in that familiar, living warmth. The town stretched ahead, its single main street lined with buildings in various states of collapse. There was a post office with windows boarded over, a schoolhouse with swings still hanging crooked from a half-fallen frame, a church with its bell tower leaning to one side. Yellow grass grew waist-high where sidewalks used to be, and the sun, already heavy with evening, cast long blue shadows that crept up the steps of every porch. Sam walked slowly, Atlas at his side. The only sounds now were the crunch of gravel under boots and the softer, nearly silent pads of the dog's feet. They passed the saloon, its doors missing but its sign still hanging. Fletcher's, the letters worn almost away. An old bicycle, spokes rusted, lay on its side beneath the window. He paused beside a lamppost, bent at the base, looking up the street. It was as if time had stopped here the year before he was born. Sam's reflection stared back at him from a window cracked and yellowed with age. his own eyes hollow, uncertain. Atlas moved ahead, nose to the ground, weaving in and out of the bands of sunlight and shadow. Every so often, the dog paused, ears pricked, as if listening to something only he could hear. There were traces of life here, empty cans on a windowsill, a battered boot print by the door of the old hardware store. Nothing fresh, nothing certain, just remnants. At the end of the street, the prairie opened wide again. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, clouds gathering like old memories on the horizon. Sam stood still, letting the weight of the place press against him, the hush settling on his shoulders. He glanced at Atlas, who was standing perfectly still now, eyes fixed on the open land beyond the houses. The dog's breathing was even, but there was a tension in his body, an alertness that reminded Sam of their time in service together. The way Atlas would stand before a breach, every muscle ready, every sense alive. For a long while, Sam and Atlas just stood there, two figures in a forgotten town at the edge of day. They belonged to the silence. It was heavy, but not unfriendly, a space big enough to hold what Sam had carried for years, and quiet enough for Atlas to feel safe again. Eventually, Sam turned back to the truck, dust rising with every step. He pulled an old duffel from the cab and slung it over his shoulder. Atlas followed without a word, tail low but not uncertain, brushing against Sam's knee as they walked. The sun dropped lower. In the cooling air, Sam felt the first edge of something he hadn't known in a long time. Not hope, not yet, but the sense that silence, given enough time, could become something new. And as they crossed the threshold of their new home, Sam let himself believe, for just a moment, that he and Atlas might find more than emptiness in all this quiet. Morning in Whisper Ridge had its own hush, a cold, golden light that crept low across the brittle grass, lingering on the boards and window panes, searching for signs of life but mostly finding dust. The world was so still that even the crows, perched like sentinels along the splintered fence, made no sound. In this light, every edge seemed sharper. The crumpled tin roof of the mercantile, the spiderweb cracks on the sidewalk, the faded hand lettering on the drugstore sign that nobody bothered to take down. Sam rose before sunrise, the old habit of military discipline woven too deep in his bones to break. He moved with a slow deliberateness, washing his face in the icy water he'd carried from the stream at the edge of town, tying his boots, refolding his jacket so the lining would block the morning chill. Atlas watched him the whole time, eyes bright and tail still. When Sam shrugged into his coat and stepped out onto the porch, Atlas followed, close enough that Sam could feel the dog's warmth at the back of his knee. They walked down the main street as the day began to brighten. The air was sharp and clean, smelling of dry wood and earth. Atlas trotted a step ahead, alert but not anxious. Sam's eyes followed the uneven line of rooftops, the way the sunlight slipped through broken slats and cast shadows like bars across the street. Each footstep on the warped wood walkway echoed louder than it should have. A window in the old hotel caught his eye. Its glass was streaked with dust, but behind the grime, a flicker of movement, a curtain shifting just so, as if nudged by a careful hand. Sam stopped, boots planted, and stared up at the empty rooms above. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then the curtain stilled, and the window returned to silence, no different than any other relic in town. Atlas, as if catching the scent of unease, froze at Sam's side. His whole body angled toward that spot, shoulders set, tail lowered, ears pricked to a high point. His gaze did not leave the window, even as Sam's hand found the dog's collar in a silent gesture of reassurance. They waited. The wind rattled a piece of loose tin somewhere nearby, but nothing else stirred. Sam felt his jaw tighten, old nerves waking in the back of his mind. He pressed his thumb softly against Atlas's fur, grounding himself with the simple act. The dog did not bark, did not whine, just stood, steady and unwavering, the way only a creature who trusted the person beside him could. Sam scanned the street, half expecting to see a shadow slip across the next alley, or to hear the rush of feet behind one of the doors, left swinging on its hinges. But there was nothing, only the quiet, and the persistent sense that the town's silence was not as empty as he'd thought. The moment passed, but left a tremor beneath the morning's calm. They kept walking. Sam took his time, stepping around tufts of dried grass sprouting between the boards, pausing to study the outlines of old boot prints baked into the mud by last week's rain. He noticed things he'd missed in the fading light the night before. The outline of a bicycle tire still etched in the dirt outside the schoolhouse. The glint of a tin cup left on a window ledge, catching the light just so. Atlas sniffed at each new detail, nose quivering, ears flicking at the faintest sound, a swallow's wing, the soft scuttle of a field mouse under the porch. They rounded the corner near the livery, where a swing hung from a frayed rope, swaying just barely in the breeze. Sam stood for a long moment, watching it move. The rhythm was slow, almost hypnotic. In another life, in another time, he might have sat there himself, or pushed a child in circles until their laughter rang out through the street. Now, the swing moved alone, a memory in motion. Atlas halted so abruptly that Sam nearly stumbled. The dog's body tensed, his gaze fixed not ahead but off to the side, to a narrow alley shadowed by the morning sunday. Sam followed the line of sight. A set of footprints, small and light, crossed the alley's mouth, just damp enough to hold their shape. Someone had passed this way not long ago, barefoot, by the look of it, or in thin-soled shoes. Sam felt no urge to call out, no need to break the spell of silence. He and Atlas just stood there, letting the moment settle. Eventually, he moved on, keeping to the edges of the street now, senses sharpened. He did not try to seek out the one who hid. Instead, he accepted the presence for what it was, a quiet echo of himself, another life hanging on by its own terms. When they reached the edge of town, Sam looked back. Atlas did too. The hotel window was empty, the curtain still, but something in the air had changed, as if the act of acknowledging another's presence, even silently, had shifted the balance of things. The town was no longer entirely his, nor was its silence as complete. They returned to their borrowed house as the sun crested the line of trees. Sam brewed coffee on the old propane burner, letting the steam curl up into the morning. Atlas lay at his feet, nose resting on his paws, but his eyes kept drifting toward the window. Sam sipped the bitter drink, eyes on the sunlight moving across the dusty floorboards. In that gentle, unhurried morning, Sam understood something had shifted, not in the world, perhaps, but in him. What he once would have denied or driven away, he now allowed to exist beside him, simply and without demand. Sometimes, it is not the words spoken or the hands extended that change a life, but the willingness to share space in the quiet, to acknowledge that no one is ever truly alone. The swing still creaked. The shadows still fell long. But Sam, for the first time in years, did not feel compelled to fill the silence or to chase away the traces of the people left behind. He just listened and let himself remain. Night comes differently to a place like Whisper Ridge. It slides in all at once, without ceremony. The last of the sunlight faded from the tall grass and left everything washed in gray and then black, except for the pale thread of the Milky Way stretched overhead and the pinprick shimmer of distant stars. The town, half collapsed and half forgotten, seemed to settle even deeper into itself, its old bones sighing with the drop in temperature. Sam made a small fire outside the house he'd chosen for the night. A battered, low-slung cabin just far enough from Main Street that it felt neither central nor completely lost. The act of collecting wood, stacking it just so, and striking the match was all done with a practiced patience. Atlas moved quietly alongside him, nose low, never straying far. They were a silent pair. A man and his dog, each one shaped by years of discipline, each one a little frayed at the edges. There was comfort in this ritual. The slow kindling of flame, the hiss as it caught, the settling of logs. Sam sat with his back against the porch post, boots in the dirt, watching the embers catch and glow. Atlas curled beside him, tail tucked, eyes reflecting the firelight. His breathing was steady and slow, as if he could finally let go, if only for the span of a single night. The wind rustled through the brittle grass, carrying with it the faintest scent of something sweet and living, a wildflower, perhaps, or the last of the summer's sage. Sam let his gaze travel up, to where the sky widened and deepened, the stars trembling against the darkness. For a long time, neither he nor Atlas moved. The stillness was thick enough to touch. Then, almost too soft to notice, there was the sound of footsteps, barely more than a suggestion of movement in the hush. But there, unmistakable, not the shuffle of animal paws, but the light tread of something, or someone, human. Atlas's head lifted, his body tense. But he didn't bark. He only listened, ears pointed, eyes narrow. The sound came from behind the house, skirting the edge of the fence and disappearing as quickly as it came. Sam tensed, but did not stand or reach for a light. Instead, he rested his hand on Atlas's side, feeling the quiet tension in the dog's body, the readiness. The footsteps did not return. Silence rushed in, deeper now, heavy with the knowledge of being watched, or perhaps simply noticed. He looked toward the dark, toward the place the sound had vanished. Somewhere back there, in the overgrown yard or behind a leaning shed, was a life separate from his own, a presence that made no demands and offered no explanation. It was not threat, but a question hanging in the air. A possibility. Sam didn't move to chase it. He didn't call out. He pulled his jacket tighter around his chest and let the cold settle on his skin, choosing, in that moment, to let whatever or whoever was out there exist on their own terms. He felt the prickling tension in Atlas relax, just a little. The dog's tail twitched against his leg. Sam turned his attention back to the fire, nudging a log into place, sparks whirling up and fading into the night. The minutes drifted by, marked only by the slow collapse of wood to ember and the measured cadence of his own breathing. When Sam finally rose to go inside, he stamped out the fire with deliberate care, stirring the coals until only a faint red glimmer remained. Atlas stood, shook himself, and followed without a word, the soft pad of his paws the only sound in the dark. Inside, Sam laid his sleeping roll by the back window, where a strip of moonlight cut across the floor. Atlas circled twice before settling down, his head resting on Sam's outstretched arm. The little house creaked and groaned in the wind, but there was no other disturbance. Sam lay awake for a time, listening not just for the footsteps, but for the absence of fear within himself. He was aware of the other presence, felt it as a weight in the air, or a shift in the darkness outside the window, but he did not feel the urge to wall himself off. In that uneasy peace, Sam realized how much his life had been shaped by the urge to retreat, to control every boundary, to keep the world out. Here, in this place of abandoned things and unfinished lives, he was beginning, just barely, to let that go. As sleep edged closer, Atlas stirred, nose pressed briefly to Sam's cheek. The dog's breath was warm, his presence grounding. Outside, the night kept its secrets. The fire's scent lingered on Sam's jacket, and the memory of those soft footsteps stayed with him. No longer a threat, but a reminder. Life persisted, even here, even now. He drifted off with the sound of Atlas breathing, slow and deep, a living counterpoint to the hush that pressed in all around them. Something had changed in the air, a gentler kind of silence, one that allowed for more than just endurance. And somewhere out there, where the light from the fire had not reached, someone, or something else, also found a way to keep going, just quietly enough to be part of the night. Morning light came thin and unhurried, sliding through warped window glass, glancing off dust motes that hung suspended in the still air. Sam woke before sunrise out of old habit, his body tuned to a schedule no longer required by anyone but himself. He listened to the quiet for a while, the sound of Atlas's steady breathing, the faint creak of the rafters as the house settled, the soft wind moving along the eaves. He stretched, the ache of middle age more a familiar companion than a complaint, and sat up. Atlas, always attuned to the smallest shifts, opened his eyes and blinked at Sam, then rested his chin back down as if to say, "There's no rush." Sam pulled on his jacket, moving slow so as not to break the fragile piece. He poured a little water from the jug into a dented tin mug and took it outside, splashing his face with the icy cold, rubbing his hands together for warmth. The town was just waking, but with no traffic, no clatter of deliveries, no voices. The day simply unfolded, quiet as breath. The plan was simple: find water. The old kitchen at the back of the house still had a working tap, fed by a cistern on the roof that caught what little rain fell. He stepped through the doorway, Atlas padding behind him. The linoleum curled at the edges and the counters were scratched and faded, but the room was tidy in its own way, swept clean of anything but memory. Then he saw it, a set of small, muddy footprints on the kitchen floor, zigzagging from the back door toward the old pantry. The sight stilled Sam in place. Not dog prints. These were unmistakably made by a child, light and narrow, tracking bits of dry earth across the faded tiles. Atlas sniffed the air, nose high, body held in a gentle tension that was alert but not alarmed. Sam waited, heart quietly thumping, and heard it, the faintest rustle from inside the pantry. He stepped closer, careful not to startle, and found the door cracked just wide enough for a sliver of shadow to slip out. Inside, in the dim space between stacked cans and dusty shelves, a boy crouched, maybe 10 years old, hair wild and uncombed, face smudged. He wore an old hoodie several sizes too big, knees drawn up close, hands cupped around a can of peaches, which he clutched as if it might disappear. His eyes, wide and cautious, met Sam's for just a moment. There was no panic, just the raw, startled gaze of someone who had learned not to expect kindness. Atlas stepped forward, moving with the careful gravity of a dog who understood the rules of meeting someone fragile. He didn't bark or wag. He just nosed gently at the boy's hand, sniffed, and sat down beside him, tail sweeping quietly across the floor. Sam did not speak. He put the jug of water and the tin mug on the table, set a battered spoon next to them, and backed away. In that moment, the kitchen was filled with a delicate, uncertain truce. The boy stayed where he was, motionless, except for the twitch of his fingers on the can. Sam busied himself by the sink, running a little water into the mug and rinsing it out. He moved slowly, making each motion as visible and calm as he could. Atlas sat beside the pantry, still and composed, every so often glancing up at the boy, then back at Sam, as if reminding both, "There's no danger here, not if we move gently." A few long minutes passed this way, marked only by the creak of the floorboards and the soft, steady pulse of sunlight warming the edge of the counter. The boy eventually edged forward, set the can on the table, and poured a little water into the mug. He sipped, fast at first, then slower, watching Sam out of the corner of his eye. Sam gave no sign of watching. letting his gaze wander out the window where Atlas's reflection floated beside the boys in the glass. There were no words. Sam left another can of food on the counter, a silent offering, nothing expected in return. He gathered a faded dish towel and quietly placed it nearby, as if cleaning up after breakfast, and then retreated to the back door, standing in the threshold with the morning sun at his shoulders. Atlas remained in the kitchen a moment longer, his head low, tail still. The boy, perhaps emboldened by the dog's gentle presence, reached out a tentative hand. Atlas accepted the touch, just a brush against his fur. But enough. After a beat, the boy whispered something only Atlas could hear, the words disappearing into the hush of the house. Sam waited outside, listening to the birds starting up in the cottonwoods, the hush of wind on the eaves. He felt neither angry nor intrusive, just present, a part of this moment, allowed to witness, but not intrude. Atlas eventually joined him on the porch, sitting at his side. Both of them quiet, both of them changed in some subtle way. In that simple exchange, no questions, no demands, only the sharing of space and sustenance. Sam felt something unfamiliar loosen in his chest. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a step away from solitude. A quiet acknowledgement that life, even the smallest life, had a claim here too. He glanced down at Atlas, whose eyes were bright and steady. They watched the kitchen window together, sunlight stretching further across the worn linoleum, the edges of old shadows beginning to soften. For the first time, Sam did not feel entirely alone in the house, or in the town, or in the life he was piecing together out of the remains. He closed his eyes, breathed in the sharp, cool air, and let the silence settle, a silence filled with the fragile beginnings of belonging. Sam kept to his routines that week, moving with the slow patience of someone learning how to settle his body into a new rhythm. Each morning he'd walk the length of Whisper Ridge with Atlas beside him, sometimes pausing to study the faded edges of things. A tin can half buried in dust, a weathered swing seat moving faintly in the breeze, the faint, milky sun peeking over rooftops. There was a kind of stillness here that Sam had thought he wanted. But with each passing day, he found that silence less like a shield and more like a question waiting to be answered. It was on the third morning that he noticed her. A woman, early 30s perhaps, her dark hair pulled back into a loose knot, face wind-chapped and serious, leading a small girl down the porch steps of a house across the square. The girl, no more than 6 or 7, clung to the woman's coat with one hand and held a battered stuffed rabbit in the other. Both wore clothes too big for them. The hems turned up and sleeves rolled to the wrists. Sam didn't approach. He stood a long way off, hands in his pockets, watching with a kind of reverence for their privacy. Atlas, as always, was more curious, ears pitched forward. But Sam kept a gentle hand on the dog's collar, and together they observed the family's quiet emergence into the day. The woman didn't look in Sam's direction. Instead, she guided the child to the edge of the garden, kneeling to show her something growing in the tangled weeds. The child's laughter, thin but real, carried on the breeze for just a moment, then vanished. In that instant, Sam saw a mirror of his own desire. Not to be alone, not really, but to be left alone, until it felt safe to return to the world. Here, it seemed, others nursed the same wounds in their own ways. He became aware, in the days that followed, of other subtle signs of life. Once, he saw smoke drifting from a stovepipe at dusk, in a house he thought abandoned. Another time, he caught the faint sound of a radio static. Then a burst of old country music coming from behind closed doors as he passed by. The town was not as empty as he'd first believed. It was simply cautious, its people folded inward, surviving at the edges of sight. Sam respected those boundaries. He kept his distance, moving about his work quietly. But he was not untouched by the evidence of need. A broken window patched with cardboard, a water barrel left empty too long, scraps of food missing from where he'd stored them on his back porch. These small thefts felt less like trespass than like a kind of silent agreement, an unspoken conversation between those who remained. Atlas, for his part, became a silent messenger, padding ahead on their walks, sometimes stopping to sniff at a doorstep or sitting quietly near a patch of flattened grass where children must have played. He never barked, never chased. He only watched and waited. It was one evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the houses gold, that Sam made his first small gesture. He gathered up what supplies he could spare: 2 cans of beans, a bag of rice, a faded box of tea, and a bar of soap, and left them at the foot of the porch of the house where the woman and the girl lived. He placed a jar of clean water beside the food and set a folded blanket atop the stack. He did not linger to be seen. Instead, he walked away, the gravel crunching underfoot, Atlas pacing quietly beside him. They turned the corner and paused by the fence, where Sam could just make out the movement of the front door opening, a hesitant hand reaching for the blanket. The woman's silhouette stood framed in the fading light. She didn't step outside, but Sam sensed her watching him, the silent weight of her gaze, a mixture of caution and relief. He repeated the gesture the next day, this time at the house with the smoke in the chimney. Each offering was left without a word, never at the same time of day, always with the same respectful distance. No one came to thank him. No one approached his own door. But things began to change in small ways. A fresh loaf of bread left by his gate one morning, a jar of blackberry jam placed atop his porch rail, a small pile of kindling stacked beside his door. The exchanges were never spoken of. Each act, a loaf, a blanket, a can of beans, became a way of saying, "I see you," without demanding anything in return. The town, little by little, became less a collection of abandoned houses and more a quiet web of fragile, mending connections. For Sam, the change was slow and almost imperceptible. He found himself listening for the sound of children's feet on the boards, for the laughter that came, now and then, carried on the wind. He watched as Atlas grew more at ease, tail wagging gently when the girl would appear in the yard, the dog sometimes accepting a tentative touch from small, careful hands. The silence of Whisper Ridge shifted, day by day, from something heavy and absolute to something lighter, easier to bear. Sam no longer moved through town with his eyes always down. Sometimes he would pause on the main street, looking up at the sky's broad expanse, breathing in the scent of wood smoke, feeling without needing to say it a part of this battered place and the ordinary, wounded lives that clung to it. He still did not speak much, nor did anyone else. But in the steady rhythm of giving and receiving, of small acts and silent acknowledgments, Sam sensed the first, uncertain beginnings of trust. It was a trust built not on promises or declarations, but on the quiet certainty that none of them, not even him, were truly alone here. And in the soft glow of evening, as Atlas lay with his head on Sam's knee, and the sound of a lullaby drifted through an open window, Sam felt for the first time in years a gentle easing in his own guarded heart. The ones left behind were not lost, after all. They were simply waiting, as he had been, for someone to show them how to stay. Autumn came softly to Whisper Ridge, seeping into the town with a hush that felt almost sacred. The wind, sharper now, sang through gaps in the boards and carried with it the scent of turning leaves and distant rain. Shadows lengthened on porches each afternoon, and a brittle chill clung to the grass. Sam noticed the change first in the ache of his knuckles and the way Atlas's coat grew thicker, bristling against the cold each morning as they stepped outside. With winter coming, routines shifted. Sam spent the days patching holes in the cabin walls, stuffing old newspaper into cracks, and dragging fallen branches to stack along the porch. Atlas followed him everywhere, patient and attentive, sniffing at every new bundle of firewood as if to confirm its safety. At night, when the wind pressed hard against the glass, Sam would lay an extra blanket over Atlas's back, and the dog would give a single grateful sigh, curling close, content in their shared warmth. In these weeks, the connection between the houses deepened, not with words, but with gestures. Sometimes, Sam would return from gathering water to find a bundle of carrots on his doorstep, their tops still muddy, or a handful of eggs in a chipped bowl. Other mornings, there would be a slip of paper tucked under a stone, a note written in careful, looping script. Thank you. Nothing more. Still, no one crossed the threshold into another's home. Doors remained closed. Windows were curtained against the wind. Sam never knocked, and when he saw the woman and her daughter from across the way, he only nodded, respectful, acknowledging her presence without forcing contact. Atlas was often the exception, allowed to bridge the spaces between families. He'd sometimes disappear for half an hour, only to return with a faint scent of flour or jam in his fur, evidence of a kitchen visited, and a hand outstretched in trust. One evening, as the sky bruised purple with the coming storm, Sam and Atlas sat by the fire inside their cabin, the flames painting gold on the ceiling. The wind rattled the shutters, but the room was warm, alive with the glow of simple comfort. Sam ladled soup into 2 bowls, one thick with barley and potatoes, the other a little thinner, set on the floor for Atlas. The dog ate quietly, tail flicking contentment with each mouthful, pausing now and then to glance up at Sam as if to confirm the rightness of their shared solitude. A sharp knock came at the door, unexpected, almost foreign in its suddenness. Sam paused, ladle in hand, a flicker of old caution passing over his face. Atlas lifted his head, ears pricked but not alarmed. Sam wiped his hands and went to the door, opening it with care. Outside stood the woman, cheeks pink with cold, hands wrapped around something hidden beneath her coat. Her eyes met Sam's for only a second before she looked away, clearing her throat quietly. Without a word, she extended a small bundle fresh bread, still warm, its scent cutting through the autumn air. In the crook of her arm was a glass jar of dark, jewel-like jam, lid sealed tight. She placed the gifts on the top step, not crossing the threshold. Sam nodded in thanks, his voice unnecessary. Atlas stepped out, tail wagging in gentle welcome, and the little girl appeared from behind her mother, half hiding, clutching her stuffed rabbit. For a long moment, all 4 stood in the golden spill of firelight and the blue chill of evening. There was no exchange of names, no apology for the trespass. Instead, the woman touched the top of Atlas's head, a soft, lingering gesture, and met Sam's gaze again, this time without fear. The girl smiled, just barely, and reached to touch Atlas's ear. Sam offered a shy, crooked half-smile in return, feeling the unfamiliar warmth of it spread through his chest. The woman turned and left, her daughter trailing behind, their footsteps fading into the dusk. Sam carried the bread and jam inside, setting them on the table as if they were precious things. He poured hot tea, broke the bread, and shared both with Atlas, their small meal transformed by the knowledge that it had come from another hand. That night, the wind howled around the cabin, searching for cracks, but inside was a gentle quiet. Sam watched the flames dance, letting his mind drift over the memory of the woman's careful offering, the child's shy smile, the press of fingers in Atlas's fur. He realized that these small, unspoken gifts, a loaf of bread, a jar of jam, a silent moment on a threshold, had done what months of conversation could not. They had built a bridge of trust across the emptiness. Atlas stretched out, head in Sam's lap, and gave a low, contented groan. Sam rested his hand on the dog's shoulder, fingers buried deep in the thick winter coat. The fire faded, the room darkening around them, but Sam did not feel the cold the way he once had. He sat a long while in that hush, listening not to the wind outside, but to the soft, steady breath of his dog, and the memory of another's kindness lingering in the air. Before sleep came, Sam thought of the town not as a graveyard of broken things, but as a place where hope moved quietly, patient as the seasons, needing only time and gentleness to take root. In the silence, he found himself less guarded, less separate, and wondered. For the first time, the weather turned sharper as October leaned into its last days. Every sunrise came rimmed with frost, the grass and weeds brittle under Sam's boots. Days grew shorter, dusk falling earlier, the sky deepening into that particular Montana blue that looked almost bruised. Sam fell easily into his routines, splitting wood, checking for leaks in the cabin roof, walking Atlas down empty lanes lined with yellow leaves. There was a hush to everything now. A quiet, drawn tight by the promise of winter. Atlas seemed more restless lately. His senses sharpened by the cold, his steps quicker. He was never far from Sam, but his gaze tracked movement in the corners of the town, ears twitching at sounds even Sam could not hear. Sam trusted his instincts. After so many years together, the dog's silences, his sudden alertness, had become a second language. It was late afternoon when it happened. Sam was hauling a stack of firewood through the yard, thinking only of the evening meal, of how the stew might taste with the last of the carrots from the gift left at his door. Atlas was with him, tail low, padding easily at his side until he stopped dead at the edge of the path. Nose lifted, body tense. He let out a low whine, a sound Sam had not heard in months. Before Sam could say a word, Atlas took off down the main street, moving fast and sure. A streak of black and gold against the pale grass. Sam dropped the wood and followed, boots skidding, every muscle tense. He had learned long ago not to call out, not to break the spell of trust between them. So he ran without sound, scanning for whatever had set Atlas on edge. Atlas led him past the old schoolhouse, around the side of the leaning barn, to a cluster of outbuildings, once used as storage for mining tools. There, Sam saw it. A boy hair wild jacket askew caught up to his knees in a mess of rotten timber and iron scraps. The child was the same one Sam had found in the kitchen, now fighting not to cry, his face gray with fear and pain. His left leg was pinned under a beam, thin arms straining to push it away. Atlas was beside the boy already, nuzzling his cheek, tail wagging in gentle reassurance. The dog's presence quieted the panic, helped the boy draw breath. Sam dropped to one knee without a word, pressing his hand to the beam, testing its weight. The wood was half rotted, but heavy. He braced himself, planting both feet, and heaved. For a moment nothing happened. Then the beam shifted, broke free, and Sam dragged it aside. He worked quietly, careful not to startle the boy or crush his trapped leg further. Atlas licked the boy's hand, eyes bright with silent encouragement. When the beam was gone, Sam reached to lift the boy, but paused, letting him try first. The boy grimaced and struggled to his feet, wobbling, but upright. Sam shrugged off his own jacket, warm from his body, and draped it over the boy's shoulders. He did not say, "Are you all right?" He simply checked the boy's ankle for injury, finding only a swelling, no break, and nodded once, satisfied. The boy didn't thank him, didn't speak. He clung to Atlas for a long moment, fingers buried deep in the thick fur, cheek pressed against the dog's shoulder. Atlas stood perfectly still, tail wagging, taking in the weight of the boy's relief and fear. Sam gathered the scattered wood, handed the boy a small branch as a walking stick, and together, with Atlas circling close, they moved back toward the open street. The sun was low now, gold spilling across the rooftops, turning broken windows to amber. When they reached the front of Sam's cabin, the boy paused, jacket still around his shoulders. He looked up at Sam uncertain, searching for something in the man's expression. Sam only nodded again, stepping aside, giving the boy space to leave. Atlas walked with the child until he was halfway to the house across the square. There. The boy turned, offered a quick, shy wave, and vanished inside, shutting the door softly behind him. Back at the porch, Sam sat down hard, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. Atlas came to rest beside him, pressing close. Sam laid a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the thrum of life under his palm, the pulse of something greater than just loyalty. He let the silence return, but it was a different kind of quiet now, filled with the memory of the boy's rescue, the weight of the jacket left behind, the comfort in Atlas's steady presence. Evening fell. Lights came on in a window across the square. Faint, yellow, hopeful. Sam watched as the shadows deepened, the little house still and safe. He did not need thanks or words. The act itself was enough, a simple, ordinary mercy, the kind that lingers longer than speeches. Atlas curled at Sam's feet, eyes already drifting closed. In that hush, the bond between man, dog, and those left behind in the ghost town felt strong and unbreakable. A quiet testament to the way a single action, offered without demand, could loosen the cold grip of loneliness, even if only for a night. Sam leaned back against the door, listening to Atlas's gentle breath, the distant sound of wind in the trees, and somewhere across the silent square, the muffled laughter of a child, safe for another day. The first hard frost of the season glazed Whisper Ridge in a shimmering white coat. Ice glistened on the brittle grass, the porch rails, and the old truck's windshield. Even midday sun could not drive the chill from the air. Sam could feel winter's intention in every breath. He drew its clarity, its promise to strip away all that was unnecessary and leave only what endured. He spent the day with Atlas stacking firewood, covering the last gaps in the cabin walls with feed sacks and canvas, preparing not just for the cold, but for a lengthening season of solitude. Yet, as he worked, he noticed signs of life emerging. Thin curls of smoke from several chimneys, the scent of onions and potatoes frying somewhere up the street, a sudden burst of laughter from the direction of the old schoolhouse, bright and sharp as the cold itself. Toward dusk, Sam was carrying water back from the well when he saw movement near the center of town. The woman with the wind-chapped face, her daughter clinging close, and behind them, the boy Sam had helped days earlier, now limping less, bundled in Sam's old jacket. They stood together around a low fire, built in the lee of a collapsed barn, their faces illuminated in flickers of orange and gold. Sam paused, unsure if this was an invitation or simply the gathering of a small, battered family. But Atlas had already trotted ahead, tail up, and was being greeted with shy smiles and gentle hands. Something in Sam's chest loosened. He walked closer, boots crunching over frozen ground, carrying nothing but a battered tin kettle and a deep, quiet hunger for warmth, for company, for the kind of ease that comes from being part of something, even if only for an evening. No words were exchanged. The only conversation came from the fire, the pop of burning pine, the soft whoosh as a log caught, the clink of a pot set onto the embers. The woman sliced bread and divided it carefully, giving the crusts to Atlas, who accepted them with the dignity of an old friend. The children passed around mugs of tea, their hands reddened from the cold, their eyes bright above scarves pulled high. Sam added his kettle to the fire, sharing the last of his potatoes and beans, the savory steam rising into the blue dusk. There was a rhythm to the meal, silent offerings, nods, the small choreography of passing a spoon or breaking bread. Atlas lay with his head in the girl's lap, her fingers absently stroking his fur, as if she'd done so 1,000 times before. As the food was eaten and the warmth of the fire seeped into bones and hearts alike, the silence became companionable, no longer a barrier, but a shared shelter. Sam felt the last edges of suspicion, of separateness, begin to fade. He watched the boy no longer hiding, but sitting upright, sleeves rolled back, his gaze steady and unafraid. He saw the woman relax by increments, shoulders sinking, breath coming slower, as if the act of sitting together in the open, in the night, was itself a kind of homecoming. Above them, the stars gathered, cold and clear. The town seemed to hold its own breath, as if honoring the fragile peace that had grown from so many careful gestures. Atlas stretched, yawning, and settled his head on the girl's knee, her laughter a ripple in the stillness. Sam poured tea into chipped mugs, offering one to the woman. She accepted, fingers brushing his only briefly. But the touch lingered, electric in its smallness. The meal lingered, stretching into the night. Someone produced a jar of jam. Another passed a single apple, sliced into pieces, the flesh crisp and cold. There was a dignity in this sharing, a mutual understanding that what was given was not charity but tribute, a testament to survival, to having made it through another turning of the world. When the fire burned low and the children nodded, sleep pulling them gently away, Sam found himself reluctant to leave. But he stood, gathering his kettle and tucking Atlas's leash into his pocket out of old habit. The woman met his gaze in the firelight, her eyes steady, and gave a nod, not gratitude, but recognition, the beginning of trust. Sam turned toward his own cabin, Atlas at his side. The walk home was short, the cold now softer, and the moon laid a pale silver path before them. Inside, Sam banked the coals in the stove, unrolled his bed by the window, and sat in the darkness, feeling not empty, but full, a vessel holding the night's quiet gifts. Atlas circled, then curled against Sam's side, warm and alive. The sounds of the evening, the memory of children's laughter, the hush of wind, the echo of shared bread settled over them like a second blanket. That night, Sam dreamed not of war or loss, but of ordinary things. Voices around a table, a dog's steady heartbeat beneath his hand, the simple ease of belonging. And when he woke, before dawn, he found himself smiling into the quiet, grateful for the cold that had driven them together, for the fire that had kept them there, and for the silent, sturdy bond now forged between all those who remained. The days shortened as winter deepened its hold on Whisper Ridge. Each morning arrived muted and pale, the sun a thin coin barely rising above the rooftops. Frost etched feathery patterns on the windows. The rhythm of life in town slowed to match the turning of the season. But what was once a hush of isolation now became a gentler, quiet one that sheltered growth beneath its frozen crust. Sam woke each morning to the sound of Atlas shifting by the stove. The thump of the dog's tail a soft greeting in the half-dark. Sometimes there was fresh bread at the door, or the sweet tang of smoke from another's hearth drifting through the icy air. Sam no longer walked the streets as a solitary figure. Now he nodded to the woman tending her tiny garden in the lee of the wind, waved to the boy as he limped past with a sled fashioned from scrap wood, and paused to let Atlas bask in the adoration of the girl who never tired of tracing the black stripes in his coat. It was Atlas, as always, who led the way between these pockets of fragile comfort. He made his rounds as if it were his duty, checking in on the old man who rarely left his porch, nuzzling a child's mittened hand, patrolling the edges of the square as the days grew colder. In his presence, suspicion faded, and trust took root. One visit, one gentle nudge at a time. Inside his own cabin, Sam set about patching and painting. He found an old can of sky blue paint in the shed and spent an afternoon sanding the door, covering its scars and graffiti with a careful, steady hand. The act was meditative more than maintenance. It was an act of claiming, of mending what could be mended. Later, he watched as the boy appeared, cheeks red with cold, cradling a paintbrush he'd borrowed from somewhere. Without a word, the child knelt and painted a rough likeness of Atlas on the side of the house, a dog with alert ears, wise eyes, and a tail caught in mid-wag. Sam watched the boy's tongue poke from the corner of his mouth in concentration, the strokes slow and deliberate. Atlas sat beside him as still as stone, only his eyes moving, following the brush. When it was finished, the boy looked up for approval, and Sam offered a rare, small smile. He let his hand rest briefly on the boy's shoulder, a touch that meant more than words could ever say. Other changes followed. Together, the townspeople turned a weed-choked lot into rows of spindly winter greens. The woman, her name now spoken softly from porch to porch, as Mara taught Sam how to prune the overgrown lilac bush outside his window so it might bloom come spring. The children played in the pale sunlight, laughter skipping like stones along the empty streets. Once, Sam joined them, drawn by Atlas's wild energy as he chased the sleds, barking with joy. There were no long conversations, no confessions of pain or dreams for the future. Instead, there were shared chores and the swapping of recipes, coats patched for growing children, buckets of water drawn and delivered without comment. No one dwelled on the past, not the wars, not the leaving, not the hard seasons that had come before. If sorrow remained, it was softened by the ordinary mercies of the present. One evening, as dusk fell violet and blue, Sam lingered on the porch with a mug of tea warming his hands. Atlas lay stretched out at his feet, nose twitching as he sniffed the wind. From across the street, Mara approached, her daughter skipping ahead, the boy with the jacket trailing behind. She didn't come to ask for anything, nor did Sam offer. Instead, she handed him a small loaf, braided and brushed with egg, an old family recipe. She explained in a voice both shy and proud. They stood together a moment, watching the children race Atlas down the length of Main Street, their shouts echoing off weathered boards. Mara looked up, meeting Sam's eyes. There was nothing of fear or guardedness left, only a steady acceptance. A gratitude not for charity, but for belonging. As the sky darkened, the group gathered beneath the porch light, sharing the loaf and passing a cup of tea. The simple intimacy of the scene, unremarkable, and yet, for Sam, deeply profound. For years he'd believed himself broken, fit only for quiet and for the company of one loyal dog. But now, in the hush between words and the warmth of these small rituals, he found the edges of his hurt softening. He was not alone in that healing. The town itself changed, windows mended, a new door hung on the schoolhouse, paths cleared of snow by many hands. No one spoke of leaving, no one asked who would stay. There was only the slow, persistent work of making a home, of letting hope take root where loss had once been all that grew. That night, as Sam prepared for sleep, he paused to trace the outline of Atlas's painted figure on the house. The dog, sensing the gesture, pressed close, his body solid and warm. Sam let his hand rest on Atlas's back, feeling in the steady rise and fall of breath, a promise that whatever storms might come, they would face them together. Man, dog, and the small, mending world they now called home. The wind was gentle that afternoon, gliding across Whisper Ridge, with a sound almost like singing. Sunlight slanted low and warm, painting the cracked porches and faded storefronts with gold, catching in the new green shoots that had begun to creep up through the earth. The sky was wide and cloudless. It was the kind of day that might have slipped by unnoticed in the old world, just another afternoon, but here, in this place that once belonged only to silence and ghosts, the light felt like a benediction. Sam sat on the porch, legs stretched out, a mug of coffee cradled in his hands. The wood beneath him was worn smooth from a winter's worth of sitting, watching, waiting. Atlas dozed at his feet, head pillowed on Sam's boot, one ear twitching at the distant calls of children. Across the street, laughter rang out, the boy in the battered jacket, the girl with her sunlit hair, chasing each other over the uneven planks, their voices rising in bright arcs above the hush. Mara sat on the swing at the far end of the porch, her daughter curled into her side. Every so often, she would point out a new green sprout in the garden, or stroke the girl's hair, a gesture so soft and steady, it seemed to carry the weight of all that had been lost, and all that might still be found. The children's laughter, the soft brush of Atlas's tail against Sam's ankle, the scent of earth and wood smoke, these were the threads of the new peace that had settled over Whisper Ridge. Sam let the warmth of the coffee seep into his palms, breathing in the moment. The silence he had once craved as an end in itself now lived around him like a gentle companion, never empty, never cold. The town's old wounds remained, written in the lean of a roof, the crack in a step, the hush that sometimes lingered at the close of day. But there was music in the stillness now, a rhythm found in the soft rise and fall of voices, the creak of the swing, the hush of Atlas's breath. Atlas stirred, rolling onto his side and stretching in the Sunday. The children ran to him, their hands full of wildflowers and stories. The boy patted Atlas's shoulder. The girl held out a handful of grass, and the dog accepted both with a patient dignity, tail thumping. Sam watched, a small smile easing the old lines at the corners of his mouth. Someone called out from a window. Mara rose, brushed her daughter's hair back, and together they walked across the square, pausing to greet a neighbor, to tie a shoelace, to share a loaf of bread just out of the oven. These were not grand gestures, but they shaped the hours. Each one, a quiet affirmation. We are here. We remain. We begin again. As the sun slid lower, gold deepened to amber, Sam stood and stretched, stepping down into the yard, Atlas following close. He knelt to inspect the neat rows of new-planted peas beside the porch. Tiny green shoots, stubborn in their hope. The memory of his old life flickered up, sharp for a moment. Nights spent alone, the ache of waiting for noise to end, the fear that nothing gentle could last. He looked around at the scene before him, the children, the dogs, the adults tending to small chores, the sky stretching wide and soft overhead, and felt something inside him settle. Not closure, exactly, but arrival. Evening drew them all together. Sam, Mara, the children, and Atlas gathered on the steps, passing a plate of sweet rolls, the simple meal rich with the taste of honey, and the memory of hands that had kneaded, braided, baked. The conversation was quiet, punctuated by pauses that were not empty but comfortable. Atlas, content, rested his head on Sam's knee, eyes half closed, one paw draped over the girl's foot. No one spoke of sorrow or of the winter just past. There was no need. The work of healing had been done in silence, in daily labor and mutual care. The lesson had not come all at once, but in small persistent acts. A shared meal, a mended fence, a dog's steady presence in the dark. The town had not been rescued by heroics or grand design, but by the refusal to let go, by the choice to stay, to see, to offer and accept kindness, even when it was hard. As dusk settled and the first stars appeared, Sam looked out over Whisper Ridge, the ghost town that had once promised only retreat, now remade into a place of quiet belonging. The children pressed close. Atlas's tail thumped a slow rhythm. Mara leaned back against the rail, And Sam closed his eyes, listening to the heart of the evening, the hush of wind in the grass, the breath of those beside him, the soft, ever-returning quiet. He thought of all the places he'd been, all the times he'd left before he could be left, all the days spent wishing for the kind of peace that could not be shattered. And he understood at last that peace was not something found at the end of solitude, but something built, breath by breath, in company with others, in laughter shared, in work done side by side, in the warmth of a dog's weight leaning into your hand. The silence at the close of day was no longer empty. It was a homecoming. And in it, Sam found not the end of longing, but its transformation, the chance to begin again and again, as long as the sun rose over this small town, as long as there were hands to hold, bread to break, and hearts willing to stay. As the sun settles behind the old rooftops, and quiet laughter echoes through the new green growing in Whisper Ridge, maybe you, too, feel the hush of a place that once knew only loss. Here, it wasn't strength or perfection that healed the wounded, but the slow work of kindness, the steady presence of a loyal friend, and the courage to stay when running seemed easier. Sometimes, the bravest thing is simply sharing a meal, painting hope on a wall, or letting someone human or animal rest beside you when the night turns cold. We don't choose who finds us in our loneliest seasons, but we can choose to let them stay. And in that, we become more than survivors. We become a family. If this story found a quiet place in your heart, share what it meant to you in the comments. Have you ever let someone or some loyal animal into your life when you least expected? Your words may be the comfort someone else is waiting for. And if you believe in gentle beginnings, in the slow work of healing, we'd love to hear your story, too. Thank you for listening, and for staying with us until the silence felt like home.